Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Online for Authors. I'm your host, Carole O'Neill, and with me today is Art Bell. He is the author of What She's Hiding. Welcome, Art.
Thanks, Carole. Great to be here.
Before we get started, why don't you give us all the elevator pitch of What She's Hiding?
Okay. A New York lawyer is in his office. His ex-wife comes in and says, if you don't give me a lot of money soon, they're going to kill me. And he thinks she's lying. So he basically asks her to leave. She walks out of the office, and as she's walking out, she says, they said they'll kill you too. Of course, he thinks she's lying, but that night he goes home and his apartment's turned over. So now he realizes she probably wasn't lying. He wants to help. He wants to get himself and her out of trouble. He doesn't know who's after them. He doesn't know what the problem is, and he doesn't know where she is anymore. So that's what kicks things in.
Hence, What She's Hiding. So I know the story is classified as a thriller and a mystery, but as I was reading it, I thought those readers who like to read about romantic suspense would find this also in that category. So Henry Gladstone and his wife, Leslie, they don't have a normal courtship or marriage even. Their meeting isn't even the kind we would classify it as regular. From the beginning, she was trouble. Tell us how they meet.
They are both working in the same law firm. She's a paralegal, and she is the it girl at the law firm. Everybody's kind of fallen for her. She's quite beautiful, very mysterious, very smart and capable. And Henry, like everyone else, develops a crush on her and asks her out. And she says, I can't go out with you because I'm engaged. And she shows him her engagement ring. Mm-hmm. But he persists, and they do go out. And as luck would have it, they did get into a relationship, get married. And then she left him. She just up and left one day. So right. Yeah, it was not a conventional relationship.
No. And the marriage was filled with secrets, and it didn't last long. And I remember reading that, like, I think for her second anniversary, he said, "What do you want?" She said, "A divorce."
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, I think the next time he hears from her is what you described in the opening statement about her going into his office and saying, if you don't give me $250,000, we're both going to be killed.
Right.
So he doesn't believe her. He still doesn't believe her when she says that, because she's lied so many times to him.
She's lied, and she's kept her background, most of her background, a secret.
Right. And she said this ring, I threw it in his face. And what changes his mind about believing her?
As I said, he goes home that night and his apartment door is open, and his apartment door has been ransacked. Somebody's looking for something. And he realizes that he's got, maybe she was telling the truth. And then as he's trying to go to sleep early in the morning, he gets a phone call from someone with a Russian accent and who threatens him and says, we're looking for Leslie and we know where you are. And that's what convinced him that he was in trouble and she was in trouble.
Okay. So now he learns what's really expected of him. And then he actually sort of assembles a team of people to help him. Tell us who gets to help him. How does that work?
Well, it's not so much an assembly. He immediately goes to visit his best friend, Aiden, right, who's also a lawyer. And he says, Aiden, I need help. I don't know what's going on here, and I need help. And Aiden says, okay, I'll do the best I can, but I really, I'm not sure where you can find Leslie, but maybe I can help. And his Aiden's girlfriend, it turns out, knows something about that because she was Leslie's divorce lawyer. So she kind of fills him in a little bit on the possibility and says that Leslie was engaged before she married Henry. Henry's the lead. she was engaged to a guy named Boris, who was a mobster, Russian mob. And Henry starts looking for Boris.
Yeah, and then doesn't he also get a private investigator, his friend?
Yes,
His
well, that
friend.
comes later. And what happens is Aiden offers the help of his private investigator,
Right.
whose name is Gabriella. And Henry initially turns her down. I don't need any help from you.
Yeah, he hangs up on her. Yeah.
And he hangs up on her.
But
But
she's quite the character.
She persists. She says, look, I don't really want to help you either, but Aiden's my friend and we work together and he wants me to help you, so I'm going to help you. So she insists, and Henry realizes that she's got a lot to offer in terms of help. She's tough,
amazing. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
And she's got a kid at home.
Yes.
She's like, hello. Yeah, she's a kid at home. So, she gets involved. But then his best friend's ex-wife, like you said, that becomes a little side romance that I didn't expect.
It's a main romance for Henry. And it becomes, and one of the things I wanted to do there, her name is Emma, and she was previously married to Aiden. And they actually, Emma promises to set Henry up with a girlfriend, but then decides, no, I think I'd like to go out with you myself.
Yeah.
So they kind of get together, but Henry is conflicted because he's going out with his best friend's ex-wife. Right. And as it turns out, Aiden, his best friend, is not so happy about it. And he's not even sure why. And this is the exploration of something that we've seen lots of times in real life, which is, who doesn't fall for not who. A lot of people fall for their best friend's girlfriend or wife. Right. And mostly they stay on their side of the line with that. But sometimes they don't stay on that, and sometimes it blossoms into a romance. And it's kind of confounding for every party, I mean, Aiden says, I'm not comfortable with this, but I don't even know why. I mean, she is my ex-wife. Why would I be uncomfortable with my best friend going out with my ex-wife? And for Henry, for his part, he says, look, I'm not the kind of guy initially. He says, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to go out with a friend's ex. I'm not going to do that. Right. But then he falls for her and he has no choice.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you think that there's no feeling left. And you don't have any feeling yourself, but there's some sort of possessiveness about the ex that you don't want her, but you don't want anyone else to have her either.
That's right. It's kind of a head scratcher. And I've always wondered about it myself.
Right.
And so I wanted to explore it a little bit through this relationship. And Aiden, ultimately says, I can't help you anymore. This is, you crossed the line. And you know what? I do want to address something else. You mentioned that this was, what did you call it? Romantic thriller?
Romantic suspense.
Well, okay. So let's talk about how this whole book showed up in the first place. I mean, it's really influenced by noir. And so I wrote it as a modern noir, but I really spent a lot of time over the years reading noir, reading the classic noir, Chandler and Dash Hammett and those guys, and some of the not so classic noir, and I reread some of it before I started this book because I wanted to bring that feeling into it. And as I was rereading some of it, I realized that so many of these noir novels and short stories are love stories. I mean, they really are about a guy falling for somebody, often the wrong girl, meaning someone who's going to give him real trouble, or who turns out to be a bad guy. And I was fascinated by that. And I said, okay, I'm going to build some romance into this because I want to see what the romance would look like in a modern noir novel. And that's why I wrote these interactions into the novel.
I think it does work that way. And it's interesting. I'll bet you if you look at a lot of these suspense novels, you can do the same thing with them, that there's a lot of romance thrown in. And I have a friend who writes romantic suspense, and I had never heard of it until she told me, I'm writing romantic suspense. And I looked at it and I thought, well, it could just be a mystery or it could just be a thriller. But because she puts a little more emphasis on the romance, it becomes a romantic suspense. It's really very interesting.
Interesting.
I wondered, you actually how did you make New York a character? I think it was a character in this book.
Well, I lived in New York for many years, and I worked in New York City, and I love New York. I mean, it's just the most intense place on earth. I think it's just really kind of wonderful in so many ways. But it's a great setting for noir because it's dark. You know,
Yeah.
it's literally dark. I mean, you got all these tall buildings, and it hides a lot of what's going on behind buildings. I mean, you don't really see what's going on. So I wanted my main character to be in New York, and I also wanted him to love New York and him to be fascinated by New York. And I wanted to kind of point out the little things about New York, right? What riding on the subway is like, what talking to strangers is like in New York, as opposed to anywhere else. I currently live in Park City, Utah, which is a great place to live. And everybody's so friendly. People are friendly in New York too, but in kind of a different way. And it was interesting for me to try and put my finger on what that difference was, how people in New York are friendly. And he has several interactions with strangers.
Yeah, he does.
Some of them friendly, some of them not so friendly. But, I tried to make those. Not tried. Those are realistic kinds of interactions in New York City. One is with a woman on a subway who he doesn't know, and they start talking about, the jerks on the subway or whatever. And another one is when he almost gets into a fight with someone as he's walking down the streets of New York City because he accidentally knocks down a drunk, basically, who's walking out of a bar. Mm-hmm. And somebody calls him on it. Somebody comes up and says, "What'd you do that for? What are you, a bully?" And man, that happens too.
It does.
That goes to, not to digress too much here, but that goes to the heart of what I was trying to explore in the novel, which was when violence finds you.
Yeah.
When violence finds you.
It does. It's I always living in Boston. I used to have a lot of meetings in New York with the Television Academy. And of course, there was always a lot of dinners out and meeting, people in the streets. And then one time I took my 8th grade daughter to New York City for a weekend as a birthday present. And we were walking on 8th Avenue. And all of a sudden, there was a shooting across the street. And I found that I am covering my daughter behind a car on 8th Avenue, which I have thought. So you just never know in New York what to expect.
Well, that's true. You never know what to expect. I've never been, I've never had the misfortune of being that close to a shooting in New York.
It's crazy.
So that's a rarity. I was mugged a couple of times, but you remember I lived there in the 80s when things, things were not so nice in New York City.
Right. Well, this was in the 90s, so it wasn't that far off. But
yeah, listen,
anyway,
anything can happen, and probably
it's right. It's right. I'm interested to know. I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear you say it. Are you considered a pantser or a plotter?
Pantser. I am definitely a pantser. And it's interesting to hear that you say you think you know the answer. Was that the answer you think you knew?
I think maybe because of the colorful descriptions, because of, what your background is in court TV and forensic files and a lot of nonfiction. Nonfiction is plotted. It's always plotted. You can't, it's nonfiction, right?
Right.
So that's why when I read What She's Hiding, I could see more of the other side of you, not the plotter. And so that's why I was sure you considered yourself a pantser.
Really, I started with the precipitating event that I described, where his ex-wife walks into the office and says, "We're both in trouble." And again, to explore what happens when a guy gets into trouble. I really expected it to be a short story, but I was writing it and I kept finding such interesting places to go. And then when Gabriella showed up about, I don't know, a quarter of the way through the novel, I said, wow, she's great.
She's amazing.
I want to keep writing about her. And she stayed great throughout the novel, I thought.
I was wondering if you were going to take her further, because she's quite a character.
I
love her.
Yeah, a lot of people who've read the novel said they love her. And actually, I'm in a writing group, so when I was writing, I got instant feedback. And when I introduced Gabriella, it was really a moment for the group. They were like, wow, keep writing, Gabriella. And I didn't even expect to. She phoned Henry at one point because Aiden said, phone my friend, he's in trouble, you got to help him. Right. And he hangs up on her, essentially. I thought that was going to be it. But then she shows up again. She's a good person.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, when you're a pantser, how that works. I mean, my background is also news and public affairs and, documentaries and everything that is plotted. And when I first started writing mysteries, I thought, I don't know. I had to plot it. I had to plot everything. And because of my background, I kept plotting. And then one day I was writing and suddenly I found this isn't in the plot. And it went a strange way. And I thought, wow, that's how that works. I had no idea. And with all of your information and your background on Court TV and all of that, how were you able to clear your mind of all the other previous shows you worked on in the stories? I know everybody says you need to write what you know. You need to write the background. So did you pull that from anything previously?
No, I've never come across a situation like that. And I take issue with the write what you know thing, because that would really constrict a lot of authors, I think, if they could only write what they know. I mean, I did some research for this novel, not a lot,
right.
I'm essentially lazy, but I did some research for it. And I know that, sometimes I'm reading books, novels especially, and I say, now, how did the person find all this out? Either the person was a ranger at a national park, or she spent a lot of time hanging out with them as research for this book. And a lot of times it's the latter. People research the heck out of these things.
Exactly.
So you don't have to write what you know, but I did learn a lot about storytelling from my time at Court TV. Storytelling, documentarians, as you know, and especially we were doing true crime documentaries, they take a lot of disparate elements and disparate characters, and they put it all together in a cohesive, linear, roughly speaking, story. And I was immediately fascinated by that. I am not a documentary producer in any way, shape, or form, but I've certainly worked with lots of them on crafting these things, and I saw how it was done. And a lot of times they're pantsers. I mean, they're building up characters or leaving out characters. I mean, there's a lot of decision making that goes into those documentaries. But that really kind of taught me about storytelling more than anything else. How do you tell a compelling story? How do you keep the audience either turning the page or glued to the television set? And what makes it interesting?
Yeah. So if those of you listening and watching want to know more about what she's hiding, you can go online to Novels and Latte and on Facebook and probably catch a another description of Art Bell's book. But at any rate, what are you working on now?
Well, there's been a lot of people talking about, including my publisher, doing a sequel. And, it's not easy. I realize the difficulty with doing sequels because in this book in particular, I have a story arc and a character arc. The character arc is pretty much complete, certainly for Henry. And so just to bring these characters back and, and put them in another mess or adventure, I'm not sure it appeals to me yet. I have started a sequel. We'll see what happens. But I realize the difficulties and I realize the pitfalls. So many sequels aren't nearly as good as the original. And I like my book. I like What She's Hiding. I think it's really a good book. It's really interesting. And I don't want to, just do a sequel for the sake of getting the characters back and seeing what happens. I want to do something that's good. Now, as I said, and here's my issue, What She's Hiding was about how someone like Henry, who's not a violent person, deals with mortal violence for the first time. People are trying to kill him.
Right.
And that's what I wanted the book to be about. I got to figure out what the sequel is going to be about. As I said, I started it, but I got to figure out what that's going to be about.
So you started it with Henry in it, because I'm thinking, pulling a character out like Gabrielle. I mean, I think a book about her would be so much fun.
Well, I certainly thought of that. And there's no reason I couldn't do that, except this. And I will say this: Gabriella is she's not a white Anglo-Saxon male, and I don't know if I could write as deeply about her. She's Hispanic and she's got, a single mother, and she lives in one of the boroughs and not in Manhattan. And I don't, that would take some research, and I don't want to do her an injustice.
Right.
Because I don't know that. So I really have thought about it, and I continue to think about it, but it's so hard to write about ethnicities that you're not that familiar with. I mean, it's not like I don't know,
it goes back to what you know.
Well,
in a way.
It's a little more important. It's a little more important because if you want to write about a situation that you don't know much about, that's one thing. But if you want to write about people that you don't know about, then you've got the possibility of really stepping into a hole. You know what I mean? Really kind of, I guess maybe even offend people and say, no, that's not the way it is. And that would make me sad. That would make me sad.
So what are you reading? What's on your nightstand?
I am reading, I read a lot, actually. I'm reading a book called Correspondence now. And, it's hard for me to remember who the authors are because I read so much on my Kindle. And it's lucky I remember the name of the book, right? What else have I read lately? I read a lot of thrillers, but I read a lot of other stuff. And a lot of nonfiction. I started the Kissinger biography.
Oh.
Well, I like to read that. It's only this thick.
Yes.
But I find that biographies are fascinating, especially with people like that. I read a lot of bad thrillers, I gotta say. Yeah. And my wife is also a tremendous reader. I mean, she reads constantly, and she says now, life's too short. If I don't like it after page 75, I'm out of there. And I used to do that, but now I'm kind of fascinated to see what is it about this novel that kept this person writing, because it doesn't seem to be very good at the point I'm in. So, I got to say that I believe it was Count Basie who said, he went to after hours jazz clubs in New York City. He said, something, you learn as much from bad musicians as you do from good musicians. And I always thought about that. And maybe we learn as much from bad writers as good writers in some sense.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. When do you find is best for you to write? During the day, in the evening, first thing in the morning, anytime?
I've written it all kinds of times, and I'm not one of these guys who, from 3 to 5 every day or from,
Right.
10 to 2 or whatever it is. I just,
Neither am I.
when the spirit moves me, I write. Sometimes I get up in the middle of the night if I have an idea that, often when I was writing What She's Hiding, I'd written myself into a corner because, pantsers will do that. And then I had to come up with a way out. And the way out often involved either introducing a new character or, lots of ways to do it. But that was one I kind of depended on. So, I would get up in the middle of the night and do a little of that writing. So.
Right. So how can people get in touch with you or find out more about you or follow you? You have a website?
I do have a website, artbellwriter.com. I am on Instagram, artbellauthor, and also Facebook, I guess, are sort of the same thing now. And if people want to write me about my book, I'd love to hear from them. And I'd love to hear from people I don't know about my book, which is, part of the adventure of writing a book, I think. The other thing I'd like to do, and this has been working out pretty well for me, is I'll do book clubs. And if anybody wants me to do their book club remotely, I mean, if you're living in Alaska,
right.
I'm not going to shoot up there. But, and I've been doing that. And it's so interesting to hear what people are saying when they discuss my book. Right. I mean, you said something interesting, which was the sort of the emphasis on romance. I don't know if it surprised you, but you certainly took note. And I like to hear that. I like to hear what people are finding out about my characters and the story and how it affected them. So yeah, I do lots of book clubs.
That's great. All right. Well, listen, Art, it was great talking with you, and I wish you luck on your sequel or not, whatever it is you decide to do.
I'll write something, believe me.
And yeah, please let us know. I'm anxious to read whatever it is.
Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate your time. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And please join us again for the next edition of Online for Authors.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.